Hello, my name is Zachariah with Old Man Gaming, and welcome to another Snap Judgment review. What is a Snap Judgment review if you've never listened? Well, I think most gaming reviews nowadays get caught up in completing the game or finishing a lot of percentage of it, and they forget what it was like to play the game right off the bat. So, I play games for 5 to 10 hours, and then I try and give you an idea whether you're going to enjoy the game right off the bat or not. I also, because of that, and the fact that I think video games are one of the most subjective forms of art, I don't give scored reviews here. Instead, I'll give you the overview of what the game is. I'll tell you what the pros and the cons of the game are in my point of view, as all reviews are. And then I'll tell you whether I personally will be sticking with this review, with this game or DLC outside the purposes of this video. With that being said, I am looking at Eiyuden Chronicle today, and Eiyuden Chronicle I'm going to lead right off the bat. This sucker is a spiritual successor to Suikoden, the JRPG games from the PlayStation. It was a big Kickstarter, I think the second highest Kickstarter of all time, and this game is a sword of nostalgia. A sword forged out of nostalgia, aimed directly at your inner child. But the problem is that at some point, the logic of your adult brain is going to go, why are some of these things still the way they are? So, let's get into it. Eiyuden Chronicle is a JRPG like most JRPGs. You end up taking up the mantle of a character named Noah. You're average anime JRPG protagonist. He's got a family. He's a small town guy getting mixed up in some big geopolitics. You end up joining this thing called the Watch, which is kind of like a ragtag group for one part of these big nations, and end up getting embroiled in this political plot of intrigue and craziness. The opening hours of the game are very much like you meet the characters. It shows you the ropes. It doesn't necessarily do the best job of showing you the ropes, but a lot of it is self-explanatory, so it didn't really matter. You meet Sane and some Empire characters. You end up going into a Naru Barrow, and you do a lot of missions with a lot of action centered around, exposition. After a while, this balloons, okay? And much like most of the Suikodens, you end up in this big war, creating a resistance force where you have to set up shop in like ruined castle, slowly rebuild that castle from the ground up by collecting people to join your army and fight against the evils that are plaguing the world. What's interesting and different about this game is there are over 100 characters to collect in this game, and they are all actually voice acted for the most part. There are moments where it's just their writing, and you just get like a quick flash of dialogue from them, but overall every important scene has dialogue recorded for them. The combat itself is 6-person combat. You have a front group and a rear group, and depending on your lines of combat, how far you can attack, how your how your attacks work, how your abilities work, and who they can affect. It also boils down to these things called rune lenses. There's 2 ways of using them. One is magical, using your MP, your magic points. The other is skill points, which accrue as you fight for big attacks or techniques. Then there are, of course, hero combos, much like the old Suikoden, where if you have 2 characters that are friends or in some sort of relationship, you put them together on a team, odds are they have some sort of hero attack in which you can, as long as they both have the required amount of skill points, you can click the button, it uses both of them, and then they do this really big super attack. Now, in the crux of the game, you're going to divide your time with collecting these soldiers, which sometimes involve side quests. Sometimes they're as easy as, hey, there's a guy who looks interesting, you want to join me? Sure. Other times it'll be like, go get me this thing, or go do this thing for me. Then you will also be collecting stuff for your party, but you're actually collecting resources for your castle in a very interesting mechanic in this game. Unlike the old Suikoden games, your castle would just be empty when you started it, and slowly as you collected people, they would occupy rooms in it and just breathe more life into the castle. However, in this run of things, and I only played Suikoden 1 through 3, so 4 might have been different. But in this run of things, you actually have to build your castle up and find the correct people to manage it. You want a lumber station, you've got to find that lumberjack who can run it. You want a cooking station, you need to find the chef who can run the restaurant, so on and so forth. But in addition to that, you also have to collect resources while outside in the quest zones. Food, lumber, stone, iron ore, stuff like that, to slowly build your castle and facilities up, which is different than Suikoden, to have you actually have a care for that. Not only have a care for that, but be able to prioritize what things you want to get added or improved on your castle over just, hey, I found a guy, now that the room's occupied. You will also participate in giant war sections, big overtures when your armies take on their armies in the big overarching war. We'll get to that segment later in the cons. And then there's also these kind of little duel sections, which is much more like a rock, paper, scissors cinematic fight sort of thing. Don't hate these things. However, there are definitely some weaknesses in that area. But we'll get to that, like I said, in the pros and cons. But that's basically how this game pours out. Much like your average JRPG. You run around the overworld, eventually you run into fights, just random generated fights, and then your characters level as they kill bad guys. Depending on where they are and how much level they are is how much experience points they get. And yeah, so guess what? That's the game. It's Suikoden to a T. I really, and those games were nostalgia for me, but did this one hold up? And I'm going to say overall yes, but with some caveats. So let's go ahead and get into some of that. But first we're going to start with the pros. I always like to start positive. So right off the bat, there is a system in this game of equipping that I really liked. Back in the old days, you had to buy your equipment, then you had to go into a different menu, equip your character with the equipment that you wanted, then go back and sell that equipment. With this, they streamlined that process. So when you go into a shop, say an armor shop, and you buy a new set of armor for one of your people, it'll immediately ask you when you buy it, do you want to equip it? And then you pick the person you want to equip, and then it will immediately ask you if you want to sell their old armor. I loved this. This is great. The minute I saw that, I got super excited. And this is the kind of quality of life things that JRPGs need from the old school PlayStation days. Look, there are definitely a couple of those games that hold places in my heart, but that does not necessarily make them good as far as 2024 standards. There's so many things that we have learned and realized, especially with our processing power, that we're able to do now that we couldn't do back then. And sometimes they fall a little bit short on the quality of life. This is not one of those times. I absolutely love the equipment / the storing. Really enjoyed it. The biggest pro with a bullet, is the aesthetic. And it's two parts, two pros in one: the soundtrack and the art. The art is gorgeous sprites set against beautifully, colorfully 3D rendered backgrounds, and landscapes. Could not be happier with this. It is the right amount of nostalgia with the right amount of nowadays tech that just gets me so excited and so happy. It's so nice to see the live sprites, but it's also nice to see a very clear, beautiful landscape that you're running around on. And I just really, really enjoyed that. There are a couple of issues with the landscaping, which we'll talk about in the cons, but overall, I really, really enjoyed the art, the aesthetic, and the soundtrack is killer. This will be going on one of my plays, my regular plays, if I can find it on Spotify. Just the boss music, the fight music, it just pumps you up. It takes you right back to those old JRPGs. And let's face it, those old JRPGs, Final Fantasy battle music, stuff like that, just always cuts to the core. It is the best part of those games. A lot of times a good musical track can let you see past any sort of mechanic that you don't like, and this game isn't different with that. So next pro is the voice acting. I was thoroughly surprised when I saw voice acting in this, and in fairness, I did not follow the Kickstarter. I was aware of it. I was excited when this was coming out. I was looking forward to it. But I did not know that they were going to have this much voice acting in it. Basically, every major scene with story has fully... You can read it, but it has fully realized voice acting. There are a couple of moments when you're like walking around a castle and just randomly talk to somebody where basically you'll get just like a splash voice act, like "Arr!" for like the wolf or whatever, and then it'll just be like a generic text box. But anytime they are in a plot, anytime they're in a storyline, communicating with actual characters, telling you the story, and this includes the side plots, side stories for like finding people and whatnot, it's fully acted voice acting. What's even more impressive about this is when you form your team appears in every cutscene. Regardless of who you have in there, they're there, and they will actually like chime in with different comments, making them feel real, making them feel part of the story. It's one of the things that I truly disagreed with many of the mainline reviews, especially IGN, which said that like a lot of the characters are one note and they're forgettable. I thought this actually made them very not one note, very not forgettable. I actually feel more of a kinship and a friendship with the characters that I put on my team. Outside of just old school Sakiden, where it was like, this guy looks cool, he's a badass samurai, I want him in the team. This actually has that. Plus, let's face it, I hate reading. I hate the games with just huge tech-based. I get so tired, I just don't want to do it anymore. This fixes that, and it was a huge quality of life improvement. I love this. I love the voice acting here. My next one is the gimmicks. Now, a lot of people have complained about some of the gimmicks in this. And I see their complaints, but overall as a whole I like the system. What is a gimmick? Certain boss fights will have these like gimmicks. Even some of the normal fights have kind of like an interesting gimmick of like grab a treasure chest or hit somebody. And the gimmicks basically, they boil down to like, instead of attacking a character flipping a switch, or instead of attacking a character taking cover behind rubble that fall. Basically they're situational instances in the combat that kind of spice things up and make things interesting. Like the first one you run into, there's a robot that knocks part of the roof down and then has this extremely powerful laser beam and will lock onto certain parties of your character. Those party members, you have to make sure use the gimmick and go behind cover so that they don't get damaged by the laser. Stuff like this. There is a couple of bad ones. There's one where you're randomly picking between two different like magical hammers to hit a bad guy, and there's no rhyme or reason on which one is actually going to hit the bad guy, and it's super frustrating, super irritating to have that gimmick be boiled down to RNG, especially since the gimmick does so much damage that it's almost required to beat the boss, so you have to keep like committing somebody to this random 50-50 chance thing. So some of them are a little half-baked, but overall I think that this system brings just such a coolness to the game. Like, there was another gimmick in which I was fighting 3 bad guys in a boss fight, and there's this crane that is going to drop stones, and it took me a really long time to figure out when I had to hit the switch to kind of get it on the bad guys. What I realized is I had to actually pay attention to the attack order and make sure that my last person who went after their person hit the switch to make the rock drop on the bad guys, because they kept just switching it back to me. Those kind of things just make it very interesting and bring a new level of play to, otherwise just, trading punches. My next one, and like I said, lots of pros and cons in this, so bear with me, guys. I wrote a lot of stuff down. My next one is possibly one of my favorites, because this is a quality of life thing for games like this that really was needed. And that's the attendance system. Look, my first con, we're going to talk about it in cons, is no character creation. I'll talk about that there. But one of the things that's always irritating about games like this is you have to use certain characters for certain missions. And those characters don't always fit into your squad build. They also don't always fit into what you like as a player. I don't particularly love the main character in this game. Not like as a character he's fine, just using him in combat. But he's got to be on everything. He's the main character. The attendance system, so when you're doing your party makeup, you get the 3 frontliners, you get the 3 rear liners, you get a support character, which is very interesting because if characters have a support, you can put them in this role and they'll give you just little passive bonuses without being involved in the fight. But you can also have 3 attendants. Now the attendants do not get experience points. They do not participate in combat, but they count as being part of your party. So say you have 3 characters that are locked for a mission, and the 3 characters you don't like, you don't use, you don't want them in your party. Well, guess what? You can move all 3 of those characters to the 3 attendant spots and then build your party the way you want to. I love this. I absolutely love this. JRPGs have needed this forever, especially games. Any game where you have a ton of characters and a build system for the characters themselves and how they work within the team, but you're stuck with certain characters, this is way better. This is the way it should have been the whole time. I'm so glad that this is locked in and the way it is. So, attendance system, full clap. My final pro is the castle build system. Castle build system is great here. Like I said, classic Eiyuden was very like, hey, here's a thing you're doing. With the castles, you collect a person, castle gets a little bit prettier. With this one, you actually have to collect resources, you actually have to look at the blueprints, and overall they're all like pre-made buildings that just appear after you build them, but there's still like thought put into how you want to build this castle out. What do you want to make better? Do you want to prioritize the weapons? Do you want to prioritize the other things? They're also all locked behind finding characters that can allow you to run the facilities, which makes you force you to go out and collect those characters. And I really like that about this game, is they find ways so that you can experience the whole game instead of just like, hey, point A to point B, Let's hit into the cons. Let's go negative now. No character creation. 2024, I like games to have character creations. I understand you're trying to do a super big narrative. It would have been just as easy to make the story revolve around Noah, but the main character that you play is the one you create, and you can give them the abilities you want. Like, stuff like that. I would have much rather had some form of character creator in a game like this. I just, honestly, even if this isn't made for it, I'm not saying there's no place for narrative-driven fixed characters. I just like character creator. It's just, maybe it's nitpicky. I just like to see character creators. I like to have that customization over my game and my characters. My next con we kind of touched on a little bit in the pros. While the hand-drawn art is beautiful, the camera is only adjustable in the overworld. When you're in the actual dungeons, there are places where you can literally walk behind stones and trees and get your character lost. Sometimes it's hard to even tell where the path is, what you're supposed to be walking on, because it's so well drawn. So yeah, that was something that irritated me a little bit. I often got lost in the map a little bit, and especially in a map where you're taking on random generated enemies every random. Wandering can get you killed real easy. So that was a little annoying, especially like the first dungeon I was in. I had a really hard time figuring out where the path was because you had to kind of walk up these vines. That just kind of annoyed me a little bit, kind of irked me a little bit. I understand why it's here, and it's hard to draw that balance between, hand-drawn art and, a clear path. But I gotta say, I gotta call it out. It was a little bit hard to see where I was going at time. Next one, I do these reviews for the moms and the dads and the professional people who do not have a ton of time to play video games at night, who don't have, more than like a half an hour to an hour to jump into a game for a little bit before they got to get out, before they got to go to a kid thing, before they got to do something, before they got to go to bed. This might not be the game for you, I'm not going to lie. There is a ton of talking in this game, and there are save points. They utilize save points. You can't just save anywhere and jump out of the game. So there's whole times where you'll be like, I'm just going to do one more thing, and then you're just stuck in exposition after cutscene after exposition after cutscene in like an hour and a half of storyline that you cannot fast forward through because you need to see it. You can't save during, you can't quit during, you're just stuck in. And that is a huge problem. This is not a game that dumps you. I will say you get into the action pretty fast in the game, like overall in the storyline, but this is not a game that you can sit down to play without having a couple of hours. Like, you just you can't. You can't just jump into a jump out. It's just not that kind of game. And be buyer beware with that. Okay. Next big one. This is a two-parter, and it is super frustrating. It is easily my biggest problem, my biggest con with the game, and that is how they do the experience point system. This is the area of JRPGs that needs the most, like, quality of life kind of love, and they did not do it here. So if a character is downed at the end of the battle, that character gets no experience points. So if you're at a boss and two of your characters go down, the other characters are going to gain like 3 levels out of it, while those two characters get nothing. In addition to that, if you are not running a character in your party, those characters don't get experience points at all, which effectively nullifies them later in the game. Now, they do advance pretty fast if you can manage to put them in a party and keep them alive with like higher level people who can take out the big guys, almost like power leveling, but this is super annoying. It is a super annoying, grindy mechanic that I don't like, especially in a game that is made to experiment with the builds of your party. Like, that's what I love about this, is the characters feel fresh, they feel original, they feel different. Like, I have one guy who's a tank who can do this huge, like, wide range attack on multiple characters, and another guy who's a tank who is much more precise on his damage. Some do more damage, some do less, some are faster, some are stronger. Playing with those 6 people, especially with the attendance system where you can take all the characters that are locked that you don't want in there and just stick them in the attendance, it's so much fun to play with. Like, what if I put these 6 people together? You can't do that in a lot of ways because you'll end up taking your 6 people onto a big section or chapter of the game, a big dungeon. Those people will all gain like 6 or 7 levels. Anybody stuck at home is all the way down. It's so hard to then power level them back up just to play with the build system. There should have been some sort of mechanic, and if there is later in the game, because I know that fast travel is later in the game and I haven't unlocked it yet, so if there is, I will happily eat my words, but this is a snap judgment review. But there should be some sort of mechanic where I could pay money or something to bring the characters up to the party level average. Doesn't have to be above it, doesn't have to max it, but if I want to play with this level 6 character and I am at level 16 parts of the game, I should be allowed to take this level 6 character and power level them, especially since you have no control other than what runes you put in on what levels up on them anyway. That's predestined. So just power level them up and move on. It is such a grindy time sink that does not need to be there. It's super tedious and it's super irritating for that level. And this is just something that is a holdover from the last generation that we could just make better in this one. It just doesn't need to be there. Finally, last con, it's a quick one. The war mode, don't really care for it. I felt like the Suikoden ones were a little bit more thought out and balanced. This one you end up kind of like just making overarching moves with a couple of like simple orders and then just watching to see what happens in the battle, and they make it look really pretty, which I like, and they make it look very narrative, which I like, but they don't give you much control over it. It really feels a lot more like you're watching a battle play out than actually being involved in it. Am I going to stick with the game or not? Yes, I am. I kind of want to finish this game, get all the way to the end, and just see what I can see in it. I love this game. The nostalgia blade hit my inner child and has slayed him. He is going to be playing this thing whether my logic brain wants him to stop or not, and I really enjoy it. Overall, some quality of life improvements that could be made. I also, just a little aside note, I hear that the Switch version is broken. I played this on Game Pass for PC, so I do not know about any of that, so that's why I'm not speaking to it here. But I will be overall sticking with it, playing it to its conclusion, collecting as many of the heroes as I want, playing with those build systems, and enjoying it. You guys can tell me if I got it right or wrong in the comments below. You can contact me on Facebook at OldManGamingDH, on X at OldManGaming9. You can also join our Discord, links in the description below, and influence us in all of our shows from there. As long as you guys keep watching, listen, I'll keep making them. See you guys next time.